What is the creepiest, most blood-chilling thing you or someone you know have ever experienced? When my friend's dad was around 17 years old, he decided to go camping with about 8 or so of his friends. This took place in the Wisconsin forest. When they got to the site, they decided to split up to collect firewood in groups of 2, and meet back at the site in around 20 minutes. One group wasn't back right away, and since they were a couple, they just assumed they were fornicating in some bushes, and cracked a couple jokes about it. After around an hour they decided they should probably go look for them, and headed off to search in the area they had been collecting wood. They saw behind a bush part of the girl's bloody shirt, and the man's shoes were lying scattered around the scene. They quickly rushed back to their car so they could drive to the park ranger's office, which was about 5 miles away, and report the incident. However, they found that their gas had been siphoned, so they had no choice but to walk. On their walk back to the office, they saw a semi pass by with one driver and 2 faces pressed up against the window, which they believe were their friends begging for help. The 2 friends were reported missing and have never been found to this day. About 10 years ago, I took my dog out for a short walk. We lived in a rundown but historic part of town, old houses that are either beautifully maintained, abandoned, or generally going to shit. There was a good mix of people in that neighborhood. Anyway, walking the dog, I get about 3 or 4 houses down and stop at the corner while Pony sniffs some grass or whatever. I turn around and suddenly there is a man standing way too close to me. No idea where he came from. I'm usually very aware of my surroundings, and Pony hated strange men. I stumbled a few steps back. I immediately had this absolute bone-chilling sick feeling. He asked me, "Is that a pit bull?" And I replied yes. Then he said, "Oh, she'll protect you." At this point, my body flooded with adrenaline and I turned to run back to my house. I saw my mom standing on the porch and thought to yell to her. She had no reason to come out on the porch. I honestly think she had a bad feeling. I don't know what good me yelling really did, but it was all I could think to do. Like, "Hey, look, I'm over here." I've never had such a flight response before or since that encounter. My mom had a stalker for years. She was maybe in her early 30s. I was about 3 and my brother was around 1 when this started. My dad would leave for work in the morning, and as soon as he was gone, the calls would start coming in. She'd answer the phone and some guy would be saying all this horribly sadistic and sexual things about what he wanted to do to my mom. She was beyond frightened and didn't know what to do. Sometimes the caller would describe what she was wearing at that very minute or describe what she was doing. My parents were struggling financially, so they couldn't just up and move, but my mom started spending more and more time at my dad's mother's house when he was away. The cops got involved but they couldn't trace the call. Finally, they were able to save up enough money to move. I was about 6 by this time. The phone number was changed and unlisted in the phone book. This was around 1988 when everyone still used landlines. My mom never got another scary phone call, but she had nightmares about it for years. When I was little, I remember going into her bedroom in the morning and she would be sobbing into her pillow. I didn't understand it at that point, but she explained later in life that she'd wake up from a nightmare and just shake and cry. A couple months after we had moved, the cops informed us that they finally caught the guy. It was our next-door neighbor's 19-year-old son. He had been in the military but was discharged due to severe mental illness. I guess he was put into some sort of special security home that specializes in mental health. The lead investigator said that the son was obsessed with my mother and they found a box in his room full of a bunch of photographs candidly taken of her when she was out in the garden or playing with us kids in the yard. It chills me to the bone when I think about it now. Anything could have happened to my mother when my dad was at work and he'd be too young to help her. In college I worked security for extra money. One of my regular assignments was the overnight shift at a metal fabrication factory. One of the primary reasons I was there was to ensure that no one broke in to steal all the valuable metal that was stocked on site, which was an occasional problem. That, in turn, involved checking the perimeter fence for damage at least once a shift. That couldn't be done effectively by camera. It instead required physically walking the fence. So it was that one night I was walking the perimeter fence in the middle of a thunderstorm. My attention was on the beam of my flashlight illuminating the fence as I walked past. So, I wasn't really focused on where I was walking, despite walking through grass that was a bit over my waist. Apparently I just stepped awkwardly on a patch of particularly slick grass or mud as I was heading downhill, but before I knew what was happening I had slid feet first into an open storm sewer. Some asshole had stolen the manhole cover recently and the edges around the opening were wet with rain and mud thanks to the storm. Let me just take a moment to explain this storm sewer. First off, it was shaped just like an oubliette. If you're not familiar with what that is, picture a concrete cell that is shaped like a jug, a small opening at the top with sides that slope inward to prevent someone from crawling out. In this case the bottom was maybe 10 feet square and the opening for the manhole was about twice the normal width in the center of the ceiling. There was no ladder attached and the fall was maybe 20 feet down. At the bottom the floor was sloped to form 2 trenches, in the shape of a cross. There were sewer channels going off in 4 directions, but they were only maybe a foot wide across and were blocked with metal grates. At the bottom, there were debris, including a number of large broken pieces of rebar. There were several pieces that were pointing straight up. I definitely would have impaled myself on several jagged points of rusty metal, had I hit the bottom. So, no way to escape, a long fall and a probable disabling injury at the bottom. I somehow caught myself by hooking the edge of the opening on my elbow as I fell in. I dropped my flashlight to the bottom of the pit before I stopped my momentum, so I had a great view of all that broken rebar below me while I was struggling to escape. Maybe that was the collapsed remains of the ladder? As I tried to get another handhold, my cell phone skipped out of my pocket and hit the bottom. It felt like forever before I somehow pulled myself out of that opening. I don't doubt adrenaline gave me a considerable boost of strength, but even so, I nearly lost my hold on the edge 3 times before I managed to scramble out. I was kinda just jerking my knees towards the opening and jumping a couple inches thanks to the momentum. My free hand kept scrambling for something solid to grab but I never really found anything. I'm honestly not sure how exactly I pulled myself out just using the surface tension between the mud and concrete and my hands and forearm. It felt like a miracle. All I could think of after I pulled myself out was how I wasn't due to be relieved for another 7 hours. 7 hours before anyone would even start wondering where I was, and that whole time I might have been trapped at the bottom of a pit, impaled on some rods of rebar, in the rain. I also wanted to kill whoever stole that manhole cover. I used to take care of a developmentally disabled man in a community protection program. He had to be kept away from people because of his sudden violent outbursts. His parents were rich and bought an old farmhouse on 10 acres or so about 4 miles out of town, so that he could be away from the public and not forced into a psych ward. For 4 years I worked there on a 56-hour shift, come in on Sunday evening and leave Wednesday afternoon. There were 2 of us on these shifts and we were both supposed to be there the entire 56 hours, but because we were the most senior trainers on staff we'd take turns going home on 1/2 of the nights. After 3 years of being in that house I had become comfortable with it, despite it being so isolated and overall kind of creepy. I would always stay up and watch TV until around midnight. My client was always locked in his room around 8 p.m. One night, about 12:15 a.m. I turned the TV off and pulled the covers over myself to try and get some sleep on the nastiest futon ever. There was one window in the staff room and it faced the back of the property, and was about 6 feet off the ground. I had just started drifting to sleep when I heard the most blood-curdling woman's scream from right outside the window. I popped up so fast that I nearly lost consciousness and had to steady myself in the doorway while the scream continued and then faded away. I grabbed a flashlight from the laundry room and threw open the back door, illuminating the area outside the window, and there was nothing. I ran along the perimeter of the house and saw nothing. I watched the sun come up the next morning, desperately glued to the TV, trying to distract myself from what had happened. All of the people I worked with were much older than me, and there was no good reason to play a prank like that in the middle of January in Eastern Oregon. I'm sure there's an explanation, but it bothers me to this day. I was in Vegas last year with my brother. We both like to party hard, still in our 20s. Walking down the strip, I see 2 guys with backpacks on. I know what that means. I say, damn, wish we had some weed. They immediately turn around and offer us other things as well, and we took down his number to get other things later in the night. Hours later, after tons and tons of booze and stuff, we call this guy up for more. When we met these 2 guys, they were on foot, The second time though we had to meet them in front of a hotel because they were driving, so he tells us to hop in for a few so we can get what we need without people watching. Now at this point, my brother and I are fucked up, and don't realize what's happening until it starts to get dark. We had only been driving for 10 minutes but we were obviously off the strip, away from the lights, people, anything. This guy is driving like a goddamn maniac, with music blasting so it was a bit distracting. My brother finally asks them where we're going. They say we're heading to a liquor store real quick and then they'll drop us back off, but it seems like we're in the middle of nowhere. Finally realizing the situation we're in, we open the doors while we're stopped at a light and run to the only thing we see, a gas station. We flag down a cab that drove by a few minutes later, which he says is illegal but we were obviously in need of help. After we told him what happened, he calmly tells us, "There is no liquor store over here." It was the worst and best feeling ever. We narrowly escaped God knows what, and stayed silent for the rest of the night. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.